Welcome, everybody, to week 6 of The Art of the Image. I'm Anthony, and this week we are doing light. Now, I'm a seeker of light. I don't go out to shoot stuff and things and people. Stuff is not my goal, people are not my goal. What I go out exclusively to find when I'm doing my art is light. It is everything. I hunt for it, I anticipate it, I wait for it. As a visual artist, these other things have no appeal to me in and of themselves. It is the quality of light that's falling on them that interests me. That gets me going, that makes me want to take the picture. It's not monuments and landmarks and people, bless them all, but it is the light that I'm looking for on these things. That's what gets me excited. That's what needs to get you excited. It is all about the light. Light must be put in the front of your mind when you're going out and you're being creative as a photographer. If it's not, you need to rethink how you're approaching your photography. If you're not looking for the light at every moment when you're out, then you're not really in tune to what you should actually be doing. Don't get fixated on stuff. It is the light that is special. It is the light that's going to illuminate, to give color, to make things interesting. Visually, they're not very interesting unless they have good light on them. Yeah. So if you're at the stage of your photography where you're leaving your house and you're going out to shoot and you're thinking about the stuff you're going to see, the stuff you're going to take pictures of, then I've got news for you. You're approaching photography the wrong way. The way you want to approach it is light first. You get in that zone, you get in that flow, and you look for light, solely light. And you let light lead you. You chase light, you anticipate light, you wait for light. And light will teach you. It will teach you the value of darkness. It will teach you how shades of shadows transition. If you want to create beautiful, memorable photographs, light has to be the first thing in your mind. And light has many different aspects, many different qualities to it that work on different things. You've all heard that from here, from midday to here is not a good time to take photographs. That's not true. It depends what your subjects are, what the light is falling on. If you're out in the desert, in the Sahara, and you want to convey the feeling of heat and intensity, then that midday sun is what you're going to want. It's not going to be blue hour or golden hour and all that fantastic side lighting you're going to get. If you want to show the intensity of the desert, or you're following the Berbers on their camels, you want to show what it's like to be them, to be an inhabitant of that place, and it's going to take midday light to do that. Just for an example. But if you're a landscape photographer, then you're probably going to be prone to appreciating lovely side light. If you're doing portraits, then you're going to be inclined to want to have some soft lighting. Me personally, I like backlighting quite a bit. I realized that after I was going through all my images and saying, wow, I have a lot of backlit images. But that's just me. That's how I like that effect. The word photography comes from Greek and it literally means drawing with light. It couldn't be more basic than that. We are using light as a tool. It is both our brush and our canvas. It is totally what we're all about. Our photography is not about the things and the stuff and the objects in our world that we shoot. We are chasing light. We are hunting light. We are admiring and we are embracing it at every opportunity we can in our lives, even without our cameras. Staring at that sunset, watching the light glitter off a tree, appreciating reflective qualities of puddles. This is all light appreciation. And if you want to really comprehend and start to understand light and see it in a new way, you need to be grateful for it and you need to start appreciating it when it's there. There's no such thing as bad light. It's just bad choices. If you have taken a picture of something and then you don't like the light on it, it's because you made a bad choice to shoot it in that light. Maybe it was your position, maybe it was the time of day. It could be many factors, but you always want to think about the light that's falling on your subject, because that is what's going to give it life. That's what's going to make it interesting. That is going to bring out the color or reduce the color. It's going to give it shape and dimensionality. Light does all that stuff. Of all the natural phenomenon in the world, I think light is the one that's most closest to us, because it gives our world, it makes our world comprehensible. It definitely does that. It brings color, it brings life and energy. So I am very excited about this episode. It's all about my favorite thing, which is light, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. You're going to learn a lot about light technically and emotionally, and I'm going to speak to you about it through my imagery and my story. So here we go. Yeah, so here we go. Let's get started. You would think that the sun would be a large light source, the largest there actually is, really, because it's the sun. But that's not how it works. The sun is a very small light source. It is actually a tiny, tiny spot in the sky, hence it being a small light source, regardless of its intensity. Same as a flashlight or a candle, but the sun is about 1,000,000 times more bright. But it is the size of the source that counts, not the intensity. And these small light sources produce hard light, which has the qualities of hard edge shadows and strong contrast. The shadow transition is quick or hard and goes from light to darkness with hardly any shades in between. Yeah, so you got a very definite demarcation line between the light and the dark in your shadow, unlike soft light. And in hard light, the sunny side of an object may be about 1,600% brighter than the shadow side, which is about 5 stops. A large light source is just that, large. Like light reflecting off a wall, or one of those big studio soft boxes that you see, or the sun coming through a gray, cloudy sky. That's going to be a huge, huge light source. And a large light source has very different characteristics than a small light source. It produces soft light, which has the qualities of having low contrast and a soft transition from light to shadow. And you're going to get many grades of gray or many grades of light going from the highlight to the shadow. So it's going to be a very steady gradation and very smooth going from light to dark. And that's one of the main qualities of soft light. There may not be any shadows at all because the contrast is so low. We usually use soft light for portraits, traditional kind of classical portraits, and other things that are complemented by this type of light quality. Now, when we talk about light directionality, which direction the light is coming from, it's much easier to see this directionality in hard light than it is to see it in soft light. You want to look for those shadows so you can tell the directionality of the light when it's soft. There'll be times when the light is so soft you cannot tell which direction it's coming from. I usually choose to shoot things that are closer to me, like things at my feet, walls with posters and stuff like that. Graffiti is nice in soft light because I don't need depth. I don't need dimensionality in these photographs. So soft light works well. It's also good for street portraits. So when the light is really super soft, look for the shadows, not for the highlights. You want to find out the directionality of your light by defining where the shadows fall. So from the highlights in the bricks, from the direct sunlight to where the shadow is, it's about 6 stops of light. Now that's a lot of difference. We're talking almost 3,200% different in intensity. And that's the kind of quality that hard light will present to you when you're shooting. But sometimes you could take shots where you want that hard shadow to be placed on something. Like this image here, I'm doing a little kind of mini project for myself where I'm shooting in hard light only colorful posters that are curling off the wall. I like the way the hard light gives it a lot of dimensionality because it's coming from a very high angle and it's got a very long shadow. I mean, the contrast there is something I'm really aware of. I find is a quality that makes this photograph really cool. You know, things at my feet that I shoot sometimes, like this photo here, that hard light is wicked. It just makes it so interesting. It makes those colors pop. It makes the edge transition fairly hard. You can see it's a bit softer here than it would normally be, but that's because of the texture of the ground. Kind of, you know, it's not totally smooth. It's got little ripples in it, so the light's being reflected around inside the textures here. So I've got a sort of a soft transition, but as soon as it gets to the shadow part, it goes boom. You know, it gets very dark very quickly. But hard light also works for this type of photography for me. This image here, I used a on-camera flash. You know, the whole landscape is in soft light. So I've got this very large light source above me, but I put a very small hard light source on the camera. So like two different types of light sources mixed here. And it made it it made for a very dramatic type of image, mixing these two types of light. This is a very hard light from midday sun, right? You can tell it's midday from the shadows being almost directly underneath the subjects, right? The pillows. It's a very hard line between the shadow and the light there. So that tells us that it is hard light and that my light source is very small, which in case is the sun, which is almost directly overhead. So this is midday hard light. And I think it worked really well for this picture because it's giving dimensionality to those cushions. Now, mostly the hard light is coming through the center of this photograph, just on the cushions. It gets a little bit softer off to the sides. If we're looking at the sides, the left and right here, we are in soft light because it's in shadow. Yeah, so it's a mix of soft and hard. Coming up from almost over my left shoulder, you can tell because of the shadow of where the crow is and the shadow of the tree. Now, the shadows here are not very deep and they're not very dark like in that first picture I showed you because there's loads of ambient light being bounced around from the tin wall and the bricks. So the contrast ratio between the bird and the shadow, or the bricks and the shadow, is probably only around 200%, two stops, right? Because we've got lots of ambient fill happening here. So the contrast is lessened even in this hard light. This bird really surprised me. It just kind of like was watching it, and then it flew by me, and I was looking at it, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to take a picture of this bird that was sitting down." He was not sitting, you know, birds don't sit, but he was he was in front of me, and I adjusted my camera settings without looking, you know, because I knew what my exposure was, and I knew I wanted about a 2/50th or a 400th of a second. Unlike this shot, which is just a cat sitting in a negative space, but also very hard light, very directional. In this picture, the sun is coming over. It's almost directly above me. You could tell by the shadows under the little eave here, the light's direction is coming from. And here is low morning light. And this is also hard light, but I put it under, it's also very kind of backlit, but I put this under hard light just to show you that not all hard light has to be totally contrasty. Like in the previous image that had a lot of ambient fill, this image, the contrast works, but it works because it's more of a backlit hard light. We are also approaching those kind of translucent qualities of light that are coming through the petals. Now, front light is light that comes from behind you, behind your camera. It's illuminating everything from the front, and that is making everything kind of short and flat. Forms are going to be turned into shapes more likely than not. It's not my favorite type of light to shoot in, but sometimes it's necessary, and you will get good images in this type of light. Just realize that you're going to lose a lot of dimensionality, and you're going to lose a lot of texturing in the photograph. And it can also be from a large or soft source. So front lighting hides shadows from the lens, and you lose a bit of depth. And when you lose that depth, you kind of lose a bit of emotion and the feeling. It's not the easiest light to try to translate what you're trying to say, but for some things it works. Although frontal lighting can have an application when used in a way that makes the subject pop against the darker tones around it, it's a good time to think about negative space when you have frontal lighting. This image here had some pretty strong late day front light. I've got trees behind me that are casting shadows on these trees. And here with the guys sitting down on the bench, it's a very kind of frontal, flat, soft light. It worked pretty well for these guys. There's not a lot of depth to them, but I think I get enough emotion just in their expressions. And that goes with this image too. This is a spotlight out into the water that is illuminating these boats, and we can't see any shadows on the boats. And we're not seeing any features, and it almost looks like they're drawn on the water. No depth, no texture or anything with it. This portrait is really, really soft frontal lighting. If you look at the hair right at on his forehead, you can see that the light is just coming from a little above, but mostly from the front. He's got no shadows under his eyes. There's no apparent shadow under his chin. And it's very kind of flat frontal lighting. Now, midday sun is that time that we've been told is not really the best time for photography. It's not blue hour, it's not golden hour. It doesn't have that wonderful side light. It doesn't have that wonderful soft light. It's just hard, dimensionless, direct light. And not a lot of stuff looks good under it. But sometimes you get things that are complemented by it. You go with what you get. And, under hard light, you've got to work hard to find things that look good. I'm walking around here in Havana, somewhere in Havana, and this military museum, and these old weapons looked really good under this hard light. So I exposed from the shadow side, as opposed to going to the highlight side for this shot, and it gave the not a lot of form to the plane itself, but the shadow has given it a little bit of depth, and there's not a lot of texturing going on here, but there is a bit of shape in the cone from the light kind of curling around the gradation on the cone in the front. Sometimes, we have to use midday sun to our advantage, and we shoot things and their shadows just for the sake of it. Not a stunning image, right? But it's a good use of midday light. Now, this is a midday portrait. I had no choice but to shoot this person at this time, at this location. And I think I had a flash on my camera, but his skin absorbed so much of it, I'm not sure. But yes, I did, because you could see the specular highlights in his eyes. But it's a striking, colorful image and a dramatic background, and it works really nice. His squint also kind of gives you the feeling of that intensity of the light there. So, and he's got his bright teeth, which is a nice contrast, and he looks great under this light. Like if I didn't have the flash, it would be too much contrast, but the flash even balanced it out a little bit. It gave me a 1 to 3, a 1 to 4 contrast range that I could work with and that I was happy with. But, this is midday sun being complemented by on-camera flash. If you're going to go out and shoot in midday sun, experiment with a flash. You can get some good results. So side light can come from a large or a small light source, but it is always going to be to the left or the right of where the camera is facing, the direction you're taking your photograph. And with a small light source, it's going to create very long shadows that are very prominent, and you're going to get that contrast you get with hard light with a small source. With a large light source that's coming from the side, you're going to get longer shadows, but those are going to fall off so quickly. I mean, they're going to fade very quickly that they're not going to appear very long. Yeah, but you're still going to get some kind of directionality with a large side light, okay? This is the direct side light. I think this image was not very flattering for portraiture. It's hard and it's on the side, and it's not the best portrait lighting, but this was a class in experimenting and with different types of lighting, and this is the result we get. So all the shadows on the the camera left side of the face, and all the highlights are on camera right, with a hair light coming in from the left. This image has low morning sun as side light, so we're getting long shadows, lots of contrast, but the shadows are not so apparent here because of my position. If I had been more 90 degrees to the sun, then the shadows would be longer. So these cats in Shawan are lit by a side light. It's kind of coming around. You can tell it's a very hard light from a very small source, the sun, which is coming over my right shoulder and illuminating these cats, giving them long shadows. And we're looking at the edge transition between the highlight and shadow and see that it's very small. This image, you can tell the hard light, late sun, long shadows from these tall columns, and my subject shadow is very long. And you can tell from the shallowness of the shadows that there is a lot of ambient light happening here. There's a lot of reflective surfaces, a lot of bright stuff that's filling in the shadows. So it's not so contrasty as to make for a bad portrait. It's quite pleasing to the eye, actually. This image here is a side type of backlight. I'm standing on a very large concrete or stone area, and this area is bouncing light up into the shadows. So even with that hard kind of side backish lighting, there's not a lot of contrast in the face because I'm getting fill from my surroundings, and that's a good thing to look for when you're doing portraits. So this is a direct side light from the right, but I have filled in the shadows with a camera flash. You can see the part of the flash in his sunglasses. That might be my flash, or this might be the sun, I'm not sure. But it's definitely eliminated the shadows. If you look here, there's a thin line on his neck that goes from highlight to shadow, and that shows you how much fill my flash has brought to the image. Soft light is defined by shallow shadows and a slow gradating transition from light to shadow, if there are shadows at all. It's good for portraits and scenes that benefit from low contrast. In soft light, you want to make sure of the directionality of the light, and you can do that by searching for the shadows. If you cannot find any shadows, then it is an omnidirectional light, and it is even everywhere. So this type of soft lighting is really good for portraits and some other subject matter that may benefit from low contrast. This is an example of outdoor portrait studio lighting. I've lit the woman here with a very large 4-foot wide softbox that's directly 45 degrees above the camera, and it is given a nice soft quality of light. Right under the camera, there's also a reflector coming in and filling in the shadows. So I get a contrast ratio of about 1:2, 1:3. And that is a stop difference between the highlight and the shadow. Like the highlight on the cheek and the shadow under the nose is going to be about 2 stops difference. So that's my contrast ratio I'm working with there. But the primary key light source is soft, and it's a very large source. Well, here is some window light that also is very soft, but you can see that the contrast ratio is a bit 1:3, 1:4, and you can tell that contrast range because of the shadow under his nose and under the chin. The shadows are much darker than in the previous image, but it is also a very soft light. This is also very soft light in Paris. I photographed one morning. Funny thing about this shot, it was one of my first weeks in Paris, and they were sitting there. These are the guys who paint the portraits all day of people, the tourists. And I walked around the square and I was like, I really need to take their picture. They look so amazing sitting under this soft light. And I walked by them once and said, "Bonjour, messieurs." And I didn't get the nerve to ask them for a shot. And they were looking at me. And I was like, if you don't take this picture, I said to myself, you're going to regret it for a long time. And I just had my Hasselblad. I didn't have my digital camera. I had my film camera. I went up there and I spoke my very bad French. And I said in French, would you mind if I took your portrait? And they were like, oh, of course. And the guy on the left was a Turkish guy who spoke really good English, and on the right was a French guy who spoke perfectly good French. They let me take 2 frames, and then they invited me for coffee, and I declined because the light was moving and I was on a mission to find good light. And I got this one shot, 2 frames, and I really like it. I call it the artist. The directionality of the light is from above, and we are looking at the shadows to determine where that light directionality is coming from. You look at the table, you look at the umbrella shadow. I mean, the umbrella is a fairly big object, and you can see the shadow it's casting on the wall, but it's very, very, very faint shadow. It's very kind of filled in by the ambient fill from the ground and the wall. It's got light bouncing all over the place, so that really lowers the contrast when you have stuff bouncing light back into the shadows. Now here's another window light portrait of some people eating an English breakfast. Soft light, you can tell the directionality of the light here is coming from the left because of the shadows, and also because the yellow jumper that the gentleman's wearing is much more exposed. The exposure is higher than it is to the left of the photo. You can also tell that his skin tone on his hands is about almost a stop brighter than the skin tones of the lady to the right of him. So the window is very close and it's falling off very fast from left to right here. But it is soft light and it is very complementary to this subject matter. And you notice so far, most of the shots have been about people because soft light, when I have soft light, I'm looking for portraits mostly. I'm not looking for landscapes, and I'm not looking to create depth in an image. I'm looking for soft light and a little bit of shadow to create a form to faces. Yeah, it's very complementary subject matter to that type of light. But this image here is soft light, but it is a scenic view, and it is in London, but it's one of those gray overcast days, but this type of light really makes you understand what it's like living in London and England. There's a lot of gray days, and the light here accentuates that feeling of dullness, of grayness. I mean, I love London, but my goodness, it can be very, very dull. You have to really kind of work really hard to find subjects that are interesting to shoot. On my workshops in London, when I get a great day, I'm like, oh my goodness, why can't we get a nice, beautiful, hard light morning once in a while? I get it once in a while, but most of the time it's very gray. And I tell my students, this is not the time to do scenics. Most of your shots, you're going to either take pictures of people or something that's within 10 to 20 feet of you. And we're going to work on abstract detail. And we're going to try to find natural contrast to accentuate colors and shapes and things. And that's a good lesson because it gets them away from thinking scenically, which this light is not complementary for. Unless you do something like this, which is trying to capture the vibe of an area and show your viewer what it was like on that day or what this location is like to live there. Now, this book in the road has some soft light on it. It's not so soft. It is coming from the right because you can see where the shadows are, and you can see that at the top where the paper is folding, there is a highlight there, almost. I wouldn't say blown out, but it's getting a bit hot there, and you can see how the shadow gradates over the curve of the paper. So it's not the softest light, but it's not hard light either. Somewhere in between. Now, this is a very soft light picture. All the foreground here is, you could say it's not in light. I mean, it is lit, but it's just so low contrast because the sun hasn't even come up yet. And this is like the first rays of the day, which has illuminated the top of the clouds. But in the shadow area here where the building and the trees are, the light is super, super soft. And you can see that it has made the image very, very flat. The bottom half of the image is very flat, and there's no light kind of creating depth. But I thought it was a nice contrast between that very kind of flat foreground and the depth of the clouds you get in the background. It was also a color idea that was working for me too. And using underexposure also made it more interesting for me personally. This building's in fog. Another London morning. Well, I love fog in the city because it adds a dimensionality, an aspect, an etherealness to the light that is quite rare Don't see a lot of fog in London, but when it comes, I'm always amped to go out and shoot just whatever looks good in fog. This particular morning happened to be absolutely freezing. I think my wife was one of the, this is one of the one morning she actually came out with me when I was doing the first book, and she lasted like 5 minutes, and we passed a cafe and I had to go pick her up 2 hours later. Now, if you remember the first shot of these flowers I showed you in hard light, this is a different shot in soft light. Now, this was just taken moments apart, but my position changed and I went into the shadow area and took a picture in hard light of the flowers just to get a little bit of variation as to how they were going to be rendered. So we can use soft light for many different things, but most predominantly, we don't want to use it for landscapes, but we can. So for soft light, lots of things work. Flowers, people, places. There's all kinds of stuff that works under good soft light. Its qualities will make most things quite attractive. But when you're talking for very large scenes like landscapes and scenics, be sure that your position is correct and it is the right time for you to shoot. If you've got an epic landscape in front of you, but you're working with soft light and it's not so epic because there's no textural kind of projection, or the contrast is not right, maybe it is time to come back at a later date. Put it in your calendar, come back in a few hours and make sure you get the right light for that subject. Landscape photographers will do that. They'll go out and they'll hike hours, and if they get there and it starts raining and it gets overcast, it's a write-off. They come back another day. They don't shoot and shoot and shoot like crazy and are happy about it. They'll come back another day because they know they didn't get the shot that they wanted to get. They might, hike 6 hours and take a bunch of pictures, but you'll never see them. Now, golden hour is everybody's favorite time to shoot because of the extremely beautiful qualities that light brings to the world. The qualities of morning golden hour are a bit crisper than the evening golden hour, which have a little bit more miasmic, atmospheric effects going on. There's just the dust of the day, traffic and people and industry and wind of the day bring up a lot of dust and in the air. So sunsets are usually a bit more thick than the morning golden hour. There's a time right before the sun comes up, about 4 degrees below the horizon, where your ambient light is really quite electric. Yeah, you still get the indigo deep sky, but you get in full ambient too. And it lowers the contrast of 20 minutes previous, or in the morning, let's say. And it fits within the gamut of your camera really nicely, and the exposures are super simple. You just prioritize your exposure and you get exactly what you want without much struggle, and you don't need HDR or anything like that. It's just a really simple exposure, but it's a very, really quite exciting time to shoot. Like this image here in Hong Kong, sun has just gone down and the sky is just getting dark, and I make my exposure and everything fits really easily right into the range of the camera. Fantastic. And this is another one of those times where right before the sun comes up, the sky is great. I've got plenty of shadow detail here and highlight detail. Fairly low contrast, but lots of color. It was such a beautiful morning. This is that sweet zone, that sweet time when I like to shoot. This image here in Tuscany, but the sun was so brilliant and it was just going below the clouds, just a stunning visual feast for the eyes. And it was like, wow, the castle's illuminated, the fence is illuminated, everything. It's a beautiful backlight with lots of color, lots of texturizing everything, lots of dimensionality to it. It's just a beautiful time to shoot. So the sun's come up here. It's been up for about 20 minutes and I'm just past that sweet spot that I like to shoot. And we're just coming out of golden hour here, but there's still good light. Still got long shadows for about another hour yet, but you pick your positions. I've switched from golden hour shooting here to backlight shooting, and that's produced a really quite dynamic looking image. And this is in that sweet zone of pre-sun coming up and mixing artificial lighting with that deep blue sky. This is a perfect example of that. This moment lasts about 5-10 minutes, and then the sky starts to blow out, or in Paris, the lights will go off. They shut off the lights at sunrise. So probably even less than 5 minutes to actually create this image. Nice image, but this is the sun's already up and I'm shooting in heavy shadows, and I had a problem getting a good exposure in my sky because as soon as the sun comes up, the contrast, boom, it starts to go way out of the range of the camera. I could have underexposed this a little bit more, but I was doing with a long exposure, as you can see with the blurry people there, the rush hour in Canary Wharf, and I had to have a long exposure, and that really made my sky, it was really detrimental to my sky, and it kind of suffered because of that. I could probably bring it back a little bit. Didn't completely blow it out, but I didn't get that indigo, that sweet zone kind of exposure that I was getting 20, 30 minutes earlier. And here's a post sunrise, but I picked all the tones here in the medium range, and there's nothing really blown out. The natural framing of the trees coming in there is covering the sky, so we don't see it is overexposed, but we're not really seeing that because of the trees. And this is another one in that sweet spot, right? So I got a nice artificial lighting, beautiful ambient light, and everything is kind of fitting together in a contrast range that fits really well with the camera. And I keep repeating that because that's what's so cool about this time of golden hour. You get a good mix of the artificial and the ambient with the rising sun, and you get great skies and great color rendition. And here's a little bit after that sweet spot in golden hour, and it's just starting to illuminate the world, but it's at the far end, it's at the back end of that sweet spot. And when you have such beautiful colors on a morning like this, you can keep shooting for quite a while. And that's golden hour. So what is the right light? The right light is the light that's right for you and your subject. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to get out of this light? Understanding and pursuing light is a lifelong journey, and it is something you get better at the more you practice it. Just like understanding how your camera works, using your mind and your eyes to see light, find opportunities to dissect light, is always going to help you improve in your photography, because it is the actual seeing, not for stuff and looking for things to photograph, but actually seeing and observing light is a really, really powerful way to quickly develop your skills at photography. You don't need to get overly technical, but you do need to get mentally attached to light. You must have a passion for it. You must embrace it. And when you do, your photography is going to improve. I guarantee you, if you go out and you start just photographing light instead of stuff and things, your photography is, boom, next level. Instantly. You just got to understand light, and you'll get better at it the more you practice. And this is going to be easy for you because you're a photographer and you love photography and you love light. That's why you were drawn to this medium, because it's all about light. Now you just know how important it is. So let light get under your skin. When you're out, even without your camera, you should be fascinated by and looking for the simplest qualities of light. How that tree is given dimensionality by side light. How light is emanating through the clouds and casting shadows across the land. How the highlights and shadows on someone's face move as they move. How quality of light changes depending on direction and position. These are all things that when you're in the zone and you're in the moment, you get the most joy out of looking for light rather than looking for things and stuff to photograph, because it is light that lifts you up and is so inspirational, more so than anything else you can shoot. So love light, embrace light, and look for light as your primary goal every time you go out to shoot. There will be occasions when you want to get that shot and you go, and you take it, and then you later look and see, well, I had to take that shot because I wanted that shot. And yeah, we do it all the time. I do it every day. But when I'm going out to create beautiful images, it's always the light. And remember, there's no such thing as bad light, just bad choices. So slow down, take your time with your photography, get in the moment, get in that zone, get in that flow, and look for the light. Okay, so for this week's challenge, I want you to go out and photograph light for its own sake, right? So we are in the mindset of looking at light first, looking for light first, being that observer of light only, and things and stuff and places are completely secondary. So you're going to go out. I know this is a bit obscure, but you're going to go out and you're going to look for light on things. You're not going to look for things and then light first, only light first. And you should try to capture some soft light. You should try to capture some hard light, some side light, some backlight, translucent light. What did I forget? Yes, and so be aware of large and small light sources. Yes, the sun, clear sunny day, small source. Illuminated wall with light bouncing off of it is a large source. So in the challenge, talk a little bit about the light and the type of light, the qualities of light that you took your photograph under. And that way, when you're elucidating your thoughts on that photo, you get a better understanding of it. And when you read other people's posts about their thoughts on light, increased understanding. And rapidly, we're going to get better at seeing and admiring light. We got to embrace it with everything we have. Yes, it is part and parcel, part of our creative process. It is everything to us. So I don't know if part and parcel, I don't even know what that means really. It's a part of us. So enjoy the assignment and I'll see you next week. Ciao.